Thank you both. And continuing along that vein of vendors, when we take a step back and we look at the current technological landscape, how well supported would you say the vendor space is? And what I mean by that is, where are vendors spending the most time, and is that enough for the industry's present needs, or should they be focusing their attention on something that requires greater innovation? So, I mean, TJ, we could start with you since you're on my screen.
Well, I mean, it was certainly, as Matt was describing, there are a range of vendors that do a lot of the steps. And in some ways, in the example of Echo, we've gone back at a couple of times. It's like, oh, that wasn't. I mean, it's been quite a while since they started doing these very small volume deliveries, but there was a chance that could change how you were doing things back those decades ago when that came on. Similarly, that some other kind of changes that you're like, oh, we haven't planned for that innovation. But it really was, really did change how many of the experiments were done. So I think there is this great opportunity for a game-changing idea to come along. Now, how well we can predict those or anticipate the needs is a little bit harder for us. But that's why it's great that there's a number of different groups that are coming along. And one thing that I was kind of a similar idea was brought up to my attention with one of these friends I was dining recently. Said, it seems that there's this growing aspect that companies will understand the needs and actually develop the automation in-house. And these tend to be a little bit bigger players. But he was commenting on one particular company that we actually collaborate with that really has changed this and really embraced this model. And so this is in addition to the big automation companies, but some groups really moving the needle by doing it quicker and being more innovative in this way. So I think that in addition to the outsourcing, it's really interesting to see that some of this is homegrown and filling some of the spaces.
Yeah, great. Thanks, TJ. Matt?
Yeah, so I think, we talked before, I think the technologies in general have jumped a little bit faster than the adoption has. So what I've seen a lot of focus from the industry is making it more accessible with things like, the digital twins and really focusing on how do you get these really big, intimidating hardware systems like in use by everybody. Back in the day, or it's my experience anyway, was, you'd usually have these things in the basement of some big pharma company without windows, right? Whereas nowadays it's in a fishbowl. How do you build your company almost around this really cool looking lab with glass on all sides and make it really accessible? So, with that, really comes with a drive of handling and supporting more and more users. I think with one of the areas I see them focusing on in addition to that, to TJ's point, is really enabling like more open source and accessible software and like developer friendly options. One of the companies that we rely really heavily on leans fully into this kind of modular approach where, you can actually essentially build not only the software, but the hardware yourself. Think about like Legos or building your own PC where you can get carts, you can get robotic arms, and with really minimal amount of work, you can build, deploy, and configure these things really as you need them. Research changes every day. And, if you have an assay that you maybe start out with a small volume dispenser, as it gets, spun up, takes off and really starts getting into really high scale and high throughput, maybe you need to eventually change over to a bulk dispenser. And with these more modular DIY, homegrown options out there, it's easy for teams to do that internally without having to kick off another 8-month, project with some of these vendors. And I guess one of the last things that I want to mention too, in terms of outsourcing and lowering costs, probably talk for another time, but like just introducing this idea of the cloud lab. There's a lot of companies that are spinning up now that if you don't have the justification or the space or the time to spin some of these things up, they have a factory somewhere, out in the Midwest that just has 100 Hamiltons like floating around or mass spec instruments, and the teams to support and develop it for you. So I would love for one of those to be in Cambridge. I don't think that's very economical, but there's also ways to leverage a lot of this technology and vendor experience without necessarily having to absorb all the costs, at least up front, which I think is a really interesting avenue as well.